Bombs and machine gun bullets are coming at the ship in bucket loads. But you'll see how the cameraman keeps on his feet and keeps turning. The sky's alive with enemy planes and American bullets and shells, and here's where they meet. This aircraft carrier is tearing into those bombers with her own planes. The American fighters are flying through that lead hailstorm just as much as the Japs. And here's the Japanese Raiders shot down.
Double kill!
There's a dive bomber coming right... There's the rescue of an American fighter pilot. They've got that fighter back in form. The long battle goes on.
Triple kill! Dominating!
The Nazis, when sources needed Molotov ribbon from that area further, but
bitter fight for supremacy in Asia. Japan had provoked the U.S. in the Pacific War. The Second World War now spanned the entire globe. The two naval nations competed against each other on the world's largest ocean and fought battles on an unprecedented scale. Ship in liberating Wake Island in the Central Pacific, as well as seizing Dutch-controlled India from the Dutch. The land of the rising sun was waging a merciless war of conquest, and it seemed as though nobody could stand in their way. By the spring of 1942, the Japanese dominion had expanded to its largest size ever. The Japanese Empire was at the point of having uncontested control over the entire Far East, while displacing its European colonial rulers. Thailand, Hong Kong, and Singapore fell to the Japanese in just a few weeks. North Borneo, Indonesia, and the Philippines were the next to surrender. Emperor Hirohito's troops rampaged through the Pacific region like a hurricane in the months following Pearl Harbor. I shall return, U.S. General Douglas MacArthur promised on March 12, 1942, as he was forced to flee the Philippines. In May, the remaining U.S. soldiers capitulate. Thousands of them died on their way to prison. The U.S. had no choice but to go on the defensive. President Roosevelt needed to show strength, and the Americans demonstrated their resolve by conceiving an unconventional plan. They were going to hit the enemy where it would hurt most, Tokyo, the Emperor City. The Son of Heaven would soon feel their wrath firsthand. On April 2, 1942, the U.S. aircraft carrier Hornet set course for Japan. There were 16 B-25 bombers tied down on board. In fact, the U.S. Army's airplanes were not designed for taking off from aircraft carriers. Returning to the ship and landing on deck was out of the question. Therefore, they had to fly to China after the bombing raid. The attack was drawn up and then executed by Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle, and his name went down in history for what came to be known as the Doolittle Raid. En route, the Hornet met the aircraft carrier Enterprise. It led Task Force 16, the escort for Doolittle and his planes. The crew on board the Hornet waited for its deployment. They strapped old Japanese friendship medals to their bombs as a greeting to the enemy. After Pearl Harbor, there was no longer any hope of friendship. On the morning of April 18th, the day of the attack, the fleet encountered Japanese forward post ships. The Americans managed to sink a few of these small ships. However, they were unable to stop them from sending radio transmissions. The U.S. unit had been discovered. Doolittle and Mark Mitcher, the Hornet's captain, decided to launch the bombers immediately. The first B-25, piloted by James Doolittle, took off 10 hours earlier than planned. The bombers set course for Tokyo. All the crew members were volunteers, and they knew what this premature launch meant. There wouldn't be enough fuel to make it to the part of China not occupied by the Japanese. The coup was a success. U.S. bombs fell on Tokyo. America, so the story goes, was able to strike back. Most of the bomber crews made it to non-Japanese controlled territory following the attack, and then headed home to the U.S. 2 men drowned during an emergency landing on water. 8 U.S. soldiers were taken to prison in Japan, 3 of whom were executed.
Killing spree!
Japan's leaders were shocked. The U.S. Pacific Fleet appeared to be more threatening than ever. Spring 1942, Chester Nimitz, U.S. Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific, sent a carrier strike group to the Coral Sea after receiving a warning from American radio intelligence. Admiral Yamamoto intended to attack the Americans in the Central Pacific. The Japanese planned to establish strongholds on New Guinea and the Solomon Islands in order to secure their territory. But it's here where the Americans are waiting to ambush them. This was the first sea battle in history that was fought at such long distance and using planes exclusively. The two fleets never came into view of each other. The War of the Aircraft Carriers had begun. The enemies launched their squadrons almost simultaneously. They met over the Coral Sea. The battle lasted for 2 days. The Americans sank the Japanese carrier Showa and dealt heavy damage to Japan's brand new carrier Shokaku. A third Japanese carrier lost virtually all of its aircraft. The Americans also took a real beating. The carrier Lexington sank and was heavily damaged, but the Japanese advance was halted. With their attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese had awoken a giant, now thirsty for war. Within a few months, the U.S. industry switched to the production of military equipment. It was a new generation of aircraft carriers that was meant to reclaim power for the U.S., in particular in the Pacific. The ships were fast, had a long range, and could carry up to 100 planes. The Americans moved unit after unit to the Pacific via the Panama Canal. 1942, the Americans even managed to sink the Huey, the final carrier in Japan's attack fleet. Admiral Yamamoto had to abandon his plan and withdrew. The Americans had now gone on the offensive. Their advance should have then taken them in the direction of New Guinea. But as U.S. reconnaissance planes discovered that the Japanese had built an airfield on the Solomon Island of Guadalcanal, the island became their first target. From here, Japanese planes threatened U.S. supply lines. Air dominance played a decisive role in the Pacific, and the airfield on Guadalcanal had become a powerful chess piece